The crack of AK-47 fire shattered the morning calm at Forward Operating Base Echo, ripping through the thin mountain air like thunder. "Contact! Contact!" Rodriguez's voice exploded from the radio in the command center, raw panic bleeding through the static. The drone monitor flickered to life, displaying a nightmare scenario. 8 Navy SEALs from Team 7 pinned down by over 40 Taliban fighters in the kill box of Tangi Valley. "We need immediate support, running low on ammo." Mitchell's voice crackled through the speakers, punctuated by the relentless hammering of automatic weapons fire. Colonel Harrison slammed his fist on the tactical table, making coffee mugs jump. "Helicopters are 45 minutes out. We don't have a single sniper team on standby." In the shadowed corner of the command center, a figure stood motionless, watching the chaos unfold. Mary Collins, the 52-year-old woman the entire base knew only as the Coffee Lady, wore her faded field jacket with a barely visible raven emblem on the shoulder. Just this morning, Rodriguez had mocked her about that raggedy old thing while she'd served breakfast in the mess hall. Her green eyes tracked the coordinates on the screen with surgical precision. Ridge 447, 1,200 meters, the perfect shooting angle that nobody else in the room had recognized. Mary turned and melted into the darkness beyond the doorway. Not a single person noticed her departure. They were all too consumed by the catastrophe unfolding on their screens. But in exactly 18 minutes, a shadow on that hill would change everything. The morning had started like any other at FUB Echo, nestled deep in the Hindu Kush Mountains where the air was so thin it made your lungs burn. At 0400 hours, Mary Collins was already awake, moving through the maintenance bay with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd done this routine 1,000 times. Her hands, calloused and marked with old scars, worked to the industrial coffee maker while the rest of the base still slept. By 0530, the compound stirred to life. Mary had already welded 3 stress fractures in a damaged Humvee frame, her movements precise despite the arthritis that made her knuckles ache in the mountain cold. The welding torch reflected in her eyes as she worked, illuminating a face that most people dismissed without a second glance. Weathered, unremarkable, forgettable. "Well, well, look who's playing mechanic again," a voice boomed across the maintenance bay. Staff Sergeant Tommy Hawk Rodriguez strutted in with 3 other SEALs from Team 7. At 6'3", with a bald head that gleamed under the fluorescent lights and arms thick as tree trunks, Rodriguez commanded attention wherever he went. His forest green military t-shirt stretched tight across his chest, every muscle a testament to countless hours in the gym. Behind him came Petty Officer Jake Mitchell, the team's weapons specialist, whose habit of recording everything on his phone had earned him minor social media fame. Cordman Alex Santos followed, lean and sharp-eyed, always ready with a cutting remark. Communications specialist Danny Park brought up the rear, his expression perpetually bored unless he was dismissing someone he considered beneath his notice. Rodriguez deliberately knocked over Mary's coffee mug as he passed, the hot liquid splashing across her workspace. "Oops, my bad, Grandma. Guess those old hands aren't as steady as they used to be." Mary said nothing. She simply reached for a rag and began cleaning the spill with methodical strokes, her face betraying no emotion. Mitchell pulled out his phone, aiming it at Mary. "This is perfect. Check out base maintenance featuring the world's oldest coffee maker. What do you think, boys? Should I post this to my story?" "That jacket, though," Santos chimed in, pointing at the faded garment hanging on a nearby hook. "What's that supposed to be? A chicken? Or did a bird die on your shoulder?" The group erupted in laughter. The emblem on Mary's jacket, once a fierce raven with spread wings, had indeed faded to an indistinct blur after years of wear. She continued cleaning, her silence only seeming to encourage them. Park glanced at the Humvee frame she'd been working on. "You know, there's a reason we have actual engineers for this stuff. Playing with tools doesn't make you useful. If watching elite soldiers bully someone who can't fight back makes your blood boil, if you're curious about who will save them when tables turn, hit that like button right now and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the thanks button below to support us in continuing to tell stories about silent heroes. Because sometimes, the strongest person is the one nobody notices." The SEALs moved through the bay like they owned it, which in their minds they did. They were the tip of the spear, America's finest, while Mary was just there, background noise, part of the furniture. Master Chief Patricia Wells observed from the doorway, her weathered face unreadable. 28 years in the Navy had taught her to read people, and something about Mary Collins had always struck her as off. Not wrong exactly, but like looking at a classified document with all the important parts redacted. "Rodriguez," Wells called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned every stripe. "Don't you have a mission brief at 0800? "Just getting some morning entertainment, Master Chief," Rodriguez replied with his trademark cocky grin. "Someone's got to remind the support staff about the pecking order." Wells's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing more. The SEALs strutted out, their laughter echoing through the compound. Mary finished cleaning the spill, then returned to her welding with the same steady rhythm, as if nothing had happened. At 0800 hours, the mess hall buzzed with activity. 200 personnel crowded the tables, the air thick with the smell of powdered eggs and burnt toast. Mary sat alone in the corner, mechanically eating her breakfast while the SEALs held court at the center table. "You should have seen her face when I knocked over that coffee," Rodriguez was saying, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "Like a confused puppy. Probably doesn't even know what year it is." Mitchell scrolled through his phone. Already got 200 likes on that video. Comment section's going crazy. Someone said we should start a series called Granny Goes to War. The laughter spread through the hall like wildfire. Other tables joined in, adding their own observations about the quiet woman who made their coffee and fixed their vehicles. Frank Williams, the base cook who'd been at Echo for 3 years, was the only one who didn't laugh. He'd noticed things about Mary that others missed. The way she could calculate supply requirements in her head faster than he could with a calculator, how she always knew which vehicles would break down before they did. Captain Maria Torres from Intelligence entered the mess hall, her sharp eyes scanning the room before settling on Mary. Torres had been tracking some unusual patterns in the area, enemy movements that didn't match any known Taliban tactics. She'd meant to ask Mary about it, having noticed the older woman often studied weather patterns and terrain maps during her breaks. "Collins," Torres called out, walking toward Mary's table. Mary looked up, those green eyes alert despite her otherwise passive expression. "You were checking the weather radar yesterday. Notice anything unusual?" Mary paused, setting down her fork. "Low pressure system moving in from the north. Unusual for this time of year. Creates downdrafts in the valley around 1600 hours. Torres' eyebrows rose slightly. That was surprisingly specific and accurate. "How do you know about the downdrafts?" "Been here 2 years, Mary replied simply. "You learn patterns." Rodriguez overheard and laughed. "Oh, great. Now she's a meteorologist too. What's next? Gonna tell us how to run operations?" Mary's gaze shifted to Rodriguez for just a moment. Something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, not fear, something else entirely. Then she looked back at her tray and continued eating. Santos leaned back in his chair. $20 says she can't even hold a rifle properly. Probably shake like a leaf if she heard actual gunfire. Park smirked. 50 says she'd cry at the sound of it. The betting pool grew, soldiers wagering on various aspects of Mary's imagined incompetence. She finished her meal, stood, and carried her tray to the wash station. As she passed Rodriguez's table, her sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing a circular scar on her left shoulder, perfectly round, with the distinctive star pattern of an exit wound. Master Chief Wells saw it. So did Ahmad, the base interpreter who'd seen enough battlefield injuries to recognize them instantly. But before either could process what they'd seen, Mary had pulled her sleeve down and disappeared through the doorway. At 1400 hours, the SEALs geared up for their patrol. The mission was supposed to be routine, a presence patrol through Tongji Valley to remind the locals that American forces were still watching. Rodriguez checked his M4 carbine one final time while Mitchell loaded fresh batteries into their communication equipment. Mary stood near the motor pool, ostensibly checking fluid levels in one of the transport vehicles. Her eyes tracked the cloud formations building over the mountains, calculating wind speeds and directions with a precision that would have stunned anyone paying attention. "Storm's coming in wrong," she said quietly as Rodriguez passed. He stopped, turning with an exaggerated sigh. "What was that, Grandma?" "The weather pattern. It's wrong for a standard storm. Winds will channel through the valley differently. Your comms might—" "Did I ask for the weather report?" Rodriguez cut her off. "Stick to making coffee and leave the operations to the professionals." Mitchell laughed, slinging his rifle. "Maybe she should come with us. Could use someone to carry our extra water." "Right," Santos added, though she'd probably break a hip just getting in the vehicle. The team mounted their vehicles, 4 up-armored Humvees that Mary had personally inspected that morning. She'd found stress fractures in 2 of them, but hadn't been given time to complete the repairs. The The SEALs didn't know that. They didn't know a lot of things. As the convoy rolled toward the gate, Mary walked quickly to the communications center. Sarah Kim, the night shift radio operator who was just coming on duty, looked up in surprise. "Collins, you need something?" "Keep an additional frequency open," Mary said. 47.9 megahertz. The storm's going to interfere with standard channels. Kim frowned. "That's not protocol. Who authorized?" "Just please." Mary's voice carried an urgency that made Kim's hands move to the radio controls almost automatically. "Sure, I guess. But if anyone asks..." Mary was already gone. The convoy disappeared into the dust of the mountain road, heading toward Tangi Valley, 12 clicks south of the base. Mary climbed the ladder to the observation tower, each rung a reminder of the arthritis in her hands. At the top, she pulled out a pair of battered binoculars, civilian model, nothing special, and began scanning the ridgelines. Her fingers found the focusing wheel, adjusting with practiced ease. Through the lenses, she tracked the convoy's progress, noting their speed, formation, and the way the lead vehicle was taking the corners. Too fast, too confident. They hadn't noticed the fresh tire tracks crossing the road at grid reference 3792. Below in the command center, Colonel James Harrison reviewed the daily intelligence briefing with his senior staff. At 58, Harrison had seen enough combat to fill several lifetimes. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, he'd been there for all of it. But something about today felt wrong. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe it was the unusual lack of enemy chatter their signals intelligence had picked up. "Sir," Lieutenant Jackson called from the drone station, "Team 7 just passed checkpoint Bravo. Copy that. Keep eyes on them." The drone operator, Specialist Blake, adjusted his controls, the Reaper's camera swiveling to track the convoy. On the monitor, 4 vehicles wound through the mountain passes like toys on a child's racetrack. Did you catch that strange detail about how Mary observes the map? Comment below if you can guess who she really is. Veterans watching will definitely recognize these signs. Share this video right now with your friends. They won't be able to look away from what's about to happen. At 1600 hours, the storm hit earlier than predicted. Not the gradual buildup the weather services had forecast, but a sudden, violent assault of wind and dust that reduced visibility to mere meters. The convoy slowed, then stopped at the entrance to a narrow canyon, the worst possible position tactically, but they needed to wait out the worst of the wind. "Base, this is Hawk 1, Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "We're holding position at grid 3804. Visibility is near zero." "Copy, Hawk 1, Harrison replied from the command center. "Weather should clear in 20 minutes. Mary stood in the tower, binoculars pressed to her eyes despite the swirling dust. She wasn't watching the convoy anymore. She was watching the ridgelines above them, where shapes moved through the storm with purposeful intent. Her fingers tightened on the binoculars. "No," she whispered to herself. "Not there. Not that canyon." At 1630 hours, all hell broke loose. The first RPG struck the lead vehicle's engine block, sending it sliding sideways across the narrow road. The second hit the rear vehicle, effectively boxing the convoy in. Then came the small arms fire, disciplined, coordinated, professional. This wasn't a random group of Taliban fighters. This was a planned ambush by someone who knew exactly when and where the SEALs would be. "Contact! Contact!" Rodriguez's voice exploded from every speaker in the command center. "We're taking heavy fire! Multiple directions!" The drone's infrared camera cut through the dust storm, revealing the full scope of the disaster. 8 SEALs had dismounted and taken defensive positions behind their damaged vehicles, but they were surrounded. The thermal imaging showed at least 40 hostiles, positioned on 3 sides with textbook, overlapping fields of fire. "Where's our QRF?" Harrison barked. 15 minutes to spin up, 45 to target, his operations officer replied. "They don't have 45 minutes. On the screen, muzzle flashes erupted from the surrounding hills like deadly fireworks. The SEALs were returning fire, but their ammunition wouldn't last long at this rate. Mary descended the tower ladder so quickly, her boots barely touched the rungs. She moved through the base with a purpose nobody had seen from her before, her usual shuffle replaced by something altogether different, economical, directed, dangerous. The armory was technically restricted access, but Sergeant Davis was watching the crisis unfold on his phone and didn't even look up when Mary slipped past him. She knew exactly what she was looking for, moving past the modern rifles and high-tech equipment to an older section where obsolete gear was stored. There it was, a Remington 700 from the early 2000s, its black synthetic stock worn smooth in places. The rifle that officially didn't exist because it had been listed as destroyed in a fire 3 years ago. Mary had rebuilt it herself, piece by piece, during quiet nights when sleep wouldn't come. She grabbed a small backpack from a shelf, her personal maintenance kit that nobody ever questioned. Inside were 18 rounds of match-grade .308 ammunition, each one hand-loaded to exact specifications. She'd made them herself, too, spending hours ensuring each bullet was perfectly balanced, each powder charge precisely measured. Captain Torres happened to be passing the armory when she saw Mary emerge, the rifle slung over her shoulder with a familiarity that made the intelligence officer's blood run cold. "Collins, what are you—" Mary looked at her with those green eyes that suddenly didn't seem old or tired at all. "Check your records for November 9, Operation Blackbird, 2019. Then she was gone, moving toward the base perimeter with the steady pace of someone who'd done this before. Torres stood frozen for a moment, then ran to the nearest computer terminal. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, accessing database after database until she hit a wall of classification stamps, so severe that even her intelligence credentials couldn't penetrate them. But she saw enough. A single name repeated in partially redacted reports: Raven 9. Mary knew every path out of FOB Echo. She'd walked them all during her sleepless nights, memorizing each rock, each shadow, each blind spot in the base's security cameras. The storm that was wreaking havoc with visibility worked in her favor now, obscuring her movement from the few guards who might have questioned an old woman carrying a rifle into the mountains. The path she chose wasn't on any map. It was a goat trail used by local shepherds, winding up the backside of the ridge that overlooked Tongi Valley. The climb was brutal, 1,200 meters of elevation gain over treacherous terrain. For most people, it would take 2 hours. Mary needed to do it in 30 minutes. Her knees protested with each step, the old injury from a helicopter crash in Mosul sending shooting pains up her left leg. Her breathing came hard in the thin air, but she maintained her pace, using the rifle as a walking stick when the path became too steep. In the command center, chaos reigned. Radio traffic overlapped, as Rodriguez tried to coordinate his team's defense while Harrison attempted to speed up the relief force. The drone footage showed the SEALs' situation deteriorating by the second. "I'm down to 2 mags, Mitchell's voice cut through the static. "Santos is hit. Need covering fire to get to him," Park screamed. Master Chief Wells studied the tactical display, her mind racing through options. "Sir, what about the Pakistani border unit? They're closer—" "Negative," Harrison cut her off. "They won't cross into this sector. Political situation's too sensitive." "Then those boys are going to die," Wells said flatly. On the screen, they watched one of the Taliban fighters stand up with an RPG, aiming at the SEAL's position. If that rocket hit, it would be over. The drone operator zoomed in, everyone in the room holding their breath. The Taliban fighter's head snapped back. He crumpled to the ground, the RPG tumbling harmlessly down the slope. "What was that?" Harrison demanded. "Who's shooting?" "I don't know, sir. Didn't see a muzzle flash." 14 seconds later, another Taliban fighter dropped. This one, a machine gunner who had been keeping the SEALs pinned. Then another, 14 seconds after that. The pattern was so precise, it seemed almost mechanical. Rodriguez, pressed against the twisted metal of his Humvee with Taliban bullets sparking off the armor inches from his head, noticed the change immediately. The volume of incoming fire was decreasing, but not randomly. The shooters were being taken out methodically, leadership first, then heavy weapons, then anyone trying to coordinate the attack. "Who the hell is that?" Mitchell gasped, trying to spot their benefactor. "I don't know, but they're dropping tangos like it's target practice," Rodriguez replied, his voice a mixture of relief and awe. Mary checked her equipment one final time. Her specialized communication device beeped softly. Military-grade technology with satellite connectivity that could maintain encrypted transmissions even in the harsh conditions of Afghanistan's mountains. The integrated GPS positioning system allowed for precise location tracking across any terrain, while the lithium battery pack was designed to operate continuously for 72 hours in temperatures down to -30 degrees Celsius. From her position on Ridge 447, Mary had a perfect view of the kill zone below. Through her scope, an old loophole she'd modified herself, she could see everything. The wind was gusting at 15 knots from the northwest, but she'd already calculated the adjustment. Range, 1,218 meters. Elevation difference, -300 meters. Air pressure, 620 millibars. The mathematics flowed through her mind automatically, decades of training condensed into instinct. She didn't need a spotter or a ballistic calculator. Her body knew what to do. The first target was already down, the RPG gunner who had been about to end Rodriguez's war. The second was a Taliban commander identifiable by the way others looked to him for orders. The third, another RPG carrier moving into position. Each shot followed the same rhythm. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8. At the natural pause between heartbeats, squeeze. The rifle would buck against her shoulder, that familiar push that she'd missed and hated in equal measure. 14 seconds to work the bolt, reacquire, and begin the breathing pattern again. By the 6th shot, the Taliban fighters had realized they were being hunted. They began seeking cover, their coordinated attack dissolving into chaos. Some tried to locate the sniper, scanning the ridgelines frantically. Others simply ran. In the command center, drone operator Blake tracked his camera, trying to find the shooter. "There," he finally exclaimed. "Ridge 447. Thermal signature, but it's just one person." The infrared image showed a lone figure prone on the ridgeline, methodically working a bolt-action rifle. With each shot, another attacker fell. The precision was inhuman. No misses, no wasted ammunition, just surgical elimination of threats. "Who is that?" Harrison breathed. "The moment you're about to witness will make you watch this whole thing again. Share now before the secret is revealed. Tag a friend who served in the military. They'll understand why Mary stayed silent all this time. Get ready for a twist nobody saw coming." Wells moved closer to the screen, studying the shooter's position and technique. Something about it nagged at her memory. The specific prone position, the rhythm between shots, the target selection priority. "That's Delta Force shooting doctrine," she said slowly. "That 14-second pattern. I've only seen it once before, in a training film from 2015. Torres burst into the command center, her face pale. "Colonel, you need to see this." She handed Harrison a tablet showing a partially redacted file. Most of it was blacked out, but one section remained visible. Operation Blackbird, November 9th at Sayin. Operator call sign, Raven 9. Status, MIA, presumed KIA. Confirmed eliminations, 127. Notes, only survivor of Delta Force team, redacted. Self-extracted after 43 days behind enemy lines. 89 additional eliminations during escape and evasion. Voluntary discharge for medical reasons. Redacted. Harrison's face went white. "That's impossible. Raven 9 was declared dead 3 years ago." "No, sir," Torres corrected. "Missing, presumed killed. The body was never recovered." Down in the valley, Rodriguez and his team had realized their guardian angel was giving them an opportunity. With suppressing fire coming from the ridge, they could move. Rodriguez grabbed Santos, who was bleeding from a shoulder wound, and dragged him to better cover. Mitchell and Park laid down covering fire, their training taking over despite their shock. "Hawk 1, this is Echo Base," Harrison's voice crackled over the radio. "Who is providing support?" "Unknown, sir," Rodriguez gasped between bursts of gunfire. "But they're surgical. 17 tangos down and counting. 18. That was the last number Mary counted as the final Taliban fighter. A young man no older than 20 who had been trying to flank the SEALs fell to her crosshairs. The valley fell silent except for the wind and the ringing in everyone's ears. Mary worked the bolt one final time, ejecting the spent casing. She collected all 18 pieces of brass, old habits died hard, and placed them carefully in her backpack. Each one had done its job. Each one had saved a life. The sound of rotor blades echoed through the valley as 2 Black Hawks appeared over the ridge, the quick reaction force finally arriving. Mary watched through her binoculars as the SEALs were loaded onto the helicopters, Santos on a stretcher, but alive. Rodriguez kept scanning the ridgelines, searching for his savior, but Mary had already begun her descent. The journey down was harder than the climb up. Adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the deep ache in her joints and the familiar tremor in her hands that always came after. Her left knee nearly buckled twice, but she caught herself on rocks, leaving bloody handprints that would be washed away by the next rain. She entered Phobe Echo through the same blind spot she'd exited, slipping past the motor pool where mechanics were frantically preparing vehicles for a possible rescue mission they no longer needed. The rifle went back exactly where she'd found it, cleaned and oiled, with the mechanical precision of someone who had done it thousands of times. The brass casings she'd keep, not as trophies, but as reminders. By the time she reached the maintenance bay, Mary Collins was just the coffee lady again. She hung her faded jacket on its usual hook, noting that the Raven emblem seemed a little clearer in the fluorescent light. Then she picked up a wrench and went back to work on the Humvee frame, as if the last 2 hours had never happened. In the command center, controlled chaos had replaced panic. The SEALs were inbound, the threat was neutralized, and everyone wanted answers. "I want that ridge searched," Harrison ordered. "Every inch. Someone was up there, and I want to know who." Lieutenant Jackson pulled up satellite footage from the past 3 hours, scrubbing through the timeline. "Sir, look at this." He pointed to a timestamp from 1700 hours. A single figure could be seen climbing the back of the ridge, barely visible through the storm. "That's our shooter, but the trail they took, it's not on any of our maps." Master Chief Wells studied the image. "Enhance it." The image grew larger but grainier. The figure was hunched, using a rifle as a walking stick, moving with obvious difficulty but unwavering determination. "That's not a young person," Wells observed. "Look at the gait. That's someone fighting through pain with every step." Torres pulled Harrison aside. "Sir, I've been digging deeper into Raven 9. There's something you should know. After Operation Blackbird, after the 43 days behind enemy lines, the psychological evaluation recommended immediate discharge. Severe PTSD, survivor's guilt, chronic insomnia, but Raven 9 refused treatment and disappeared from Walter Reed Medical Center. No one's seen them since." "Them?" Harrison asked. "The file doesn't specify gender, sir. Everything identifying is redacted. But there's one thing." Torres pulled up another document. Raven 9's shooting pattern was unique, 14 seconds between shots exactly. It was something about matching their respiratory cycle to manage chronic pain from injuries sustained in Blackbird. The helicopters touched down on the landing pad, medics rushing to treat the wounded. Rodriguez climbed out, his uniform torn and bloodied, but his eyes were sharp, searching. He pushed past the medical team and headed straight for the command center. "Sir," he said, bursting through the door, "permission to speak freely?" Harrison nodded. "Whoever was on that ridge saved our lives, all of us. Those weren't just good shots. They were impossible shots. Wind gusting at 15+ knots, visibility near zero, range over 1,000 meters, and they didn't miss once. 18 shots, 18 kills." Park had followed Rodriguez in, his communications equipment still strapped to his back. "I recorded some of it on my scope cam," he said, pulling out a memory card. "You need to see this." They gathered around the monitor as Park's footage played. The quality was poor, affected by the storm and distance, but they could see the muzzle flashes from the ridge, steady, rhythmic, methodical. "There," Mitchell said, pointing at the screen. "Can you enhance that section?" Blake worked his magic with the video software. The image sharpened marginally, showing the shooter's position more clearly. They were prone, rifle steady despite the wind, and then... "Is that?" Wells squinted at the screen. "They're not using a spotter, or a rangefinder, or any modern equipment at all. That's impossible," Santos said from his stretcher, having refused to be taken to the medical bay until he could debrief. "Nobody shoots like that without support equipment. Nobody human, anyway." Rodriguez was studying the tactical map, reconstructing the battle in his mind. The target selection was perfect. Leadership first, then heavy weapons, then anyone trying to coordinate. They turned a coordinated ambush into a rout in less than 5 minutes. 18 rounds, Harrison mused. Exactly 18, not 17, not 19, like they knew exactly how many they'd need. The door opened and Ahmad, the base interpreter, entered hesitantly. "Colonel, I was on the tower during the attack. I saw someone leave the base with a rifle. I think I know who it was." Everyone turned to stare at him. It was Mrs. Collins, the maintenance woman. The silence that followed was deafening. Rodriguez laughed, but it was uncertain, nervous. "That's ridiculous. She can barely walk without limping. This morning she could hardly hold a coffee cup steady." Ahmad shook his head. "I know what I saw. She had a rifle, and she was moving with purpose. Not like usual. Like she was someone else entirely." Wells was already pulling up the base personnel files on her tablet. Mary Collins, age 52, hired 2 years ago as maintenance support. Previous employment history, she frowned. It's remarkably thin. Some contract work at various bases, but nothing before 2020. "Run her prints," Harrison ordered. "I can't, sir. We don't have them on file. Her employment records show she was hired through a special program for displaced civilians. Minimal background check. Torres was typing furiously on her laptop. Sir, remember I mentioned Raven 9 disappeared from Walter Reed? The date was December 2019. Mary Collins's employment history starts January 2020. The pieces were falling into place, but nobody wanted to be the first to say it out loud. It was too impossible, too unlikely. The quiet woman who made their coffee and fixed their vehicles couldn't be one of the most lethal snipers in American military history. Could she? Rodriguez stood abruptly. There's one way to find out. He headed for the door, the others following. They moved through the base like a convoy, gathering curious looks from other personnel. The maintenance bay was dark, except for a single work light where someone was welding. They found Mary exactly where she always was at this hour, working on a damaged Humvee frame. Her welding mask was down, sparks flying as she repaired a stress fracture, with the patient precision of someone who had all the time in the world. She didn't look up when they entered, just continued her work until the weld was complete. Then she lifted her mask, revealing a face streaked with sweat and grime, those green eyes calm and unreadable. "Gentlemen," she said quietly, "can I help you with something?" Rodriguez stepped forward, his massive frame trembling slightly. For the first time since anyone had known him, he seemed uncertain, almost afraid. "Was it you?" he asked simply. Mary set down her welding torch and pulled off her heavy gloves, revealing hands marked with scars and calluses. She was quiet for a long moment, then reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a single brass casing. She placed it on the workbench with a soft click. .308 caliber, match grade, still warm. Rodriguez's legs nearly buckled. Mitchell's phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering on the concrete floor. Santos, despite his wounded shoulder, managed to stand from the wheelchair someone had forced him into. Colonel Harrison stepped forward, his voice carefully controlled. "Raven 9? Mary's eyes met his, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. Behind those tired green eyes was something else. Years of combat, of impossible decisions, of carrying weight that would crush most people. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar bland expression of Mary Collins, maintenance worker. "I don't know what you're talking about, Colonel," she said evenly. "I've been here all afternoon, working on this vehicle. Check the security cameras if you'd like." Torres quickly pulled up the security footage on her tablet. Sure enough, there was Mary, working on the Humvee at the exact time the shooting had taken place. The timestamp was clear, indisputable. "That's," Torres started, then stopped. She looked closer. The welding pattern was too regular, too perfect. It was looped footage, professionally edited. "You hacked our security system." "Did I?" Mary asked mildly, pulling her welding gloves back on. "That would be quite sophisticated for a coffee lady, wouldn't it?" The group stood frozen, uncertain how to proceed. Everything pointed to an impossible conclusion, but the evidence was contradictory, deliberately obscured. Master Chief Wells broke the silence. 18 brass casings. You collected them all except one. Why leave this one?" Mary's hands paused for just a moment. "Sometimes, Master Chief, people need proof that miracles happen, even small ones." She lowered her welding mask and returned to work, the conversation clearly over in her mind. But Rodriguez wasn't done. The big SEAL moved around the workbench, placing himself in Mary's line of sight. "This morning," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "this morning I knocked over your coffee. I mocked you. We all did. And then you—" His voice broke. "You saved our lives." Mary turned off the welding torches and lifted her mask again. For the first time any of them could remember, she smiled, just a small upturn of her lips, but genuine. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," she said formally, "you and your team are America's finest. You risk your lives every day for people who will never know your names. Whatever happened today, you earned it through your service. Heroes saved heroes, that's all." Rodriguez did something then that shocked everyone, including himself. The massive SEAL, the man who had never shown deference to anyone below the rank of admiral, slowly lowered himself to one knee. "Ma'am," he said simply, "thank you." Mitchell, Park, and even wounded Santos followed suit, kneeling on the cold concrete of the maintenance bay. It should have looked ridiculous. 4 of America's elite warriors kneeling before a middle-aged woman in grease-stained coveralls. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Get up," Mary said sharply, but not unkindly. SEALs don't kneel, not to anyone. They rose, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. The woman they'd dismissed, mocked, and ignored had revealed herself to be something beyond their understanding, not through words or boasting, but through actions that spoke louder than any medal or commendation could. Colonel Harrison cleared his throat, breaking the charged silence in the maintenance bay. Everyone out except Collins and Rodriguez. That's an order. The others filed out reluctantly, Mitchell still recording on his phone until Wells snatched it from his hands. When the door closed, Harrison pulled a sealed red folder from inside his jacket, the kind of folder that wasn't supposed to exist, containing information that was never supposed to see daylight. "Before I open this," Harrison said carefully, "I need to know something. Are you Mary Collins, or are you someone else?" Mary set down her welding torch with deliberate care. "I've been Mary Collins for 3 years, Colonel. Before that," she shrugged, "before that was a different life." Harrison opened the folder, revealing a photograph that made Rodriguez gasp. It showed a Delta Force unit in full combat gear, faces obscured except for one figure in the center. The woman holding a Barrett M82 had the same green eyes, the same quiet intensity, but her face was younger, sharper, without the weight of years and loss. November 9, 2019, Harrison read from the file. Operation Blackbird. 6 operators inserted into Coast Province to eliminate a high-value target. Enemy intelligence suggested light resistance. He paused, his voice heavy. Intelligence was wrong. Mary's hands had started to tremble, not the shake of age or fear, but something deeper, a tremor that came from memories that wouldn't stay buried. "It was a trap," she said quietly. 300 Taliban fighters. They knew we were coming, knew our route, our extraction point, everything. We lasted 17 minutes. Phoenix, Hammer, Ghost, Joker, and Titan. Gone in 17 minutes. Rodriguez found his voice. "But you survived." "I was Overwatch," Mary continued, her eyes focused on something beyond the maintenance bay walls. 1,200 meters out, just like today. I watched them die through my scope, picking off targets, trying to give them a chance. But there were too many. When the last one fell, Titan, he was 23, had a daughter he'd never met. I had 2 choices: die with them or disappear into the mountains. She walked to a tool cabinet, opened a hidden panel Rodriguez hadn't even noticed existed, and pulled out a battered notebook. Inside were pages of meticulous notes, times, dates, coordinates, and in the margin of one page, 5 names with dates of birth and death. 43 days, she continued. That's how long it took me to walk out. 89 confirmed kills along the way. Every Taliban patrol that got too close. Every checkpoint I couldn't avoid. By the time I reached friendly forces, I was 60 pounds lighter, and something inside me had broken. Harrison nodded slowly. The psychological evaluation said you were unfit for duty. Severe PTSD, survivor's guilt, chronic insomnia, but you refused treatment. What was there to treat? Mary asked, a bitter smile touching her lips. I did my job. I survived. My team didn't. No amount of therapy was going to change that. So you became Mary Collins, Rodriguez said, understanding dawning on his face. Hid in plain sight as maintenance crew. I came here to disappear, Mary admitted, to fix things instead of breaking them, to make coffee instead of calculating wind speeds, to be nobody instead of... She gestured at the folder. Instead of that. Harrison closed the file. This morning's operation, the Taliban knew exactly where our patrol would be, just like Blackbird. Someone's feeding them intelligence. Mary's eyes sharpened, the maintenance worker facade dropping entirely. The pattern's been bothering me for weeks. Patrols hit at specific times, always in positions where air support is complicated. Someone inside is marking targets. That's a serious accusation, Harrison said carefully. Check your communication logs for frequency 4, 7.9 megahertz, Mary replied. Every time a patrol's been hit, there's been a burst transmission on that frequency 15 minutes before. I've been tracking it. Rodriguez's phone buzzed. He looked at it, his face paling. Sir, you need to see this. Someone posted the drone footage from today. It's already at 2 million views. On the tiny screen, grainy footage showed the sniper on the ridge, methodically eliminating targets. The comments section was exploding with speculation. Former military personnel recognizing the technique, the precision, the impossible shots. They're calling them the Ghost of Tangi Valley, Rodriguez read. People are saying it's everything from divine intervention to a secret military program. Harrison rubbed his temples. This is going to bring attention we don't need. Mary had returned to her workbench, but her posture had changed. She wasn't hiding anymore. Colonel, with respect, you have bigger problems than viral videos. Someone in this base is going to try to eliminate me now that I've interfered with their operation. As if on cue, the lights in the maintenance bay flickered and went out. In the darkness, Mary moved with practiced efficiency, her hand finding Rodriguez's arm and pulling him down just as the window behind them shattered. Bullets sparked off the metal where they had been standing. "Stay down," Mary hissed, pulling a Glock 19 from underneath the workbench, another item that officially didn't exist. She moved through the darkness like she was born to it, using the muzzle flashes from outside to triangulate the shooter's position. 3 shots, evenly spaced. The firing stopped. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in a red glow. Harrison was already on his radio, calling for a security lockdown. Rodriguez looked at Mary with something approaching awe. She'd fired through the window at a target none of them had even seen, in near total darkness, and from the sudden silence outside, she hadn't missed. "How?" was all Rodriguez could manage. "Muscle memory," Mary replied, checking the magazine, "and 20 years of practice in places darker than this." The base erupted into controlled chaos. Security teams swept the perimeter, finding exactly what Mary had predicted: a shooter with a Taliban communication device and, more disturbing, a FOB Echo security badge. It was Corporal Anderson from the motor pool, someone who had been on base for 6 months and passed every background check. Within hours, a deeper investigation revealed the truth. Anderson was part of a larger network, feeding intelligence to Taliban forces in exchange for money funneled through a complex web of cryptocurrency transactions. 3 other personnel were arrested, including someone Rodriguez never would have suspected, Lieutenant Davis from logistics, who'd always seemed so patriotic, so dedicated. In the command center, Mary stood before a hastily assembled briefing, the senior staff hanging on her every word as she laid out patterns they'd all missed. The attacks weren't random, she explained, pointing to a map covered in red markers. They were probing actions, testing response times, identifying weak points. Today was supposed to be the big score. Taking out an entire SEAL team would have been a propaganda victory worth millions in recruitment and funding. Captain Torres studied the data Mary had compiled: weather patterns, patrol routes, communication intercepts, all meticulously documented in notebooks that looked like shopping lists but contained intelligence worth its weight in gold. "You've been running your own intelligence operation," Torres said with a mixture of admiration and disbelief, "while making coffee and fixing vehicles." "Old habits," Mary said simply. Master Chief Wells had been quiet throughout the briefing, but now she spoke up. "With all due respect, ma'am, why didn't you report this earlier?" Mary met her gaze steadily. "Because I was nobody. Who would have listened to the coffee lady's conspiracy theories? I needed proof, and getting that proof meant staying invisible until the right moment." Rodriguez couldn't contain himself any longer. "But this morning, you could have stayed hidden. You could have let us—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "No," Mary said firmly. "I couldn't. I've already watched one team die. I won't do it again. Not if I can prevent it." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a heavy blanket. These weren't just fellow soldiers to her. They were proxies for the team she'd lost. A chance at redemption she'd never thought she'd have. Video next week will feature another female sniper who changed an entire battle in Fallujah with just 5 bullets. If Mary's story touched your heart, subscribe and turn on notifications. Like and share so silent heroes like Mary get the recognition they deserve. We need to remember, not all warriors wear shining armor. Over the next 48 hours, FOB Echo transformed. The security breach had exposed vulnerabilities nobody wanted to acknowledge, and Mary found herself reluctantly pulled into planning sessions, her expertise too valuable to waste on maintaining vehicles. But she insisted on keeping her cover job. Every morning at 0400, she still made the coffee. She still fixed the Humvees. The only difference was that now people watched her with a mixture of respect and uncertainty, unsure how to reconcile the woman serving breakfast with the legend they'd discovered. Rodriguez became her shadow, self-appointed and persistent. He helped with vehicle maintenance, badly but enthusiastically, and brought her meals when she forgot to eat, which was often. "I don't need a babysitter," she told him one evening as he handed her another MRE. "Not babysitting," Rodriguez replied. "Learning. You have 20 years of experience I need to understand. Consider it training." She studied him for a moment, this massive warrior who'd gone from mocking her to kneeling before her to protecting her, all in the span of days. "All right," she conceded. "First lesson, never trust the obvious. The greatest threats are the ones that look harmless." Mitchell had turned his social media incident into something unexpected. Instead of glory-seeking posts about combat, he started sharing stories about the support personnel who kept bases running. The cooks, mechanics, supply clerks who made military operations possible. His follower count exploded, but more importantly, it started a conversation about respect and recognition for all who served, not just those in combat roles. Santos, recovering from his shoulder wound, spent hours with Mary learning field medicine techniques that weren't in any manual. She taught him how to use local plants for emergency treatment, how to perform surgery with improvised tools, skills she'd learned during those 43 days of survival. Park redesigned the base's communication security based on Mary's observations, implementing frequency hopping patterns that would make future interception nearly impossible. He also started learning Pashto from Ahmed, understanding now that every skill, every piece of knowledge could be the difference between life and death. But the most profound change was in the base culture itself. The clear divide between combat personnel and support staff began to blur. SEALs helped in the kitchen. Mechanics attended tactical briefings. Everyone understood now that warfare wasn't just about triggers and explosives. It was about the 1,000 small acts that made victory possible. 3 weeks after the Tangi Valley incident, Harrison called Mary to his office. On his desk was an official-looking document with enough classification stamps to make it practically radioactive. "They want to reinstate you," he said without preamble. "Full rank restoration, back pay, choice of assignment. The Pentagon's been watching the situation here, and they're impressed." Mary didn't even look at the document. "No. Mary, Raven 9 is dead, Colonel. She died on that mountain in Coast Province with her team. I'm just Mary Collins now, and that's who I want to be." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "You could train the next generation, pass on your skills." "I am," Mary replied. "Every time Rodriguez helps me fix a vehicle, he's learning to see patterns. When Santos watches me clean a weapon, he's understanding maintenance as meditation. When your troops see me making coffee at 0400, despite arthritis that makes every movement painful, they're learning about persistence." "That's not the same as formal training," Mary smiled slightly. "Isn't it better? They're learning because they want to, not because they have to. They're seeing strength in unexpected places, value in every person. That's worth more than any manual I could write." Harrison nodded slowly, understanding. "The offer stands if you change your mind." That night, there was an impromptu gathering in the mess hall. Word had spread about the reinstatement offer and Mary's refusal. The entire base seemed to be there, from the newest privates to the senior officers. Frank Williams, the cook who had always respected Mary, had somehow managed to produce a cake from their limited supplies. Written in frosting were the words, "Heroes come in all forms." Rodriguez stood up, raising his coffee mug, one of the thick ceramic ones Mary always insisted made the coffee taste better. "To Mary Collins," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "who taught us that the strongest warriors don't always carry weapons. That courage isn't about being fearless, but about acting despite fear. That true strength is knowing when to be visible and when to disappear." The room erupted in applause, but Mary had already slipped out the back door. They found her later in the maintenance bay, working on another Humvee by lamplight. The work was meditative for her, the repetitive motions a kind of prayer for the fallen. Rodriguez sat beside her, picking up a wrench. "You know, everyone in there wanted to thank you." "They did," Mary replied. "By continuing their service, by treating each other with respect, by remembering that everyone has value, that's all the thanks I need." They worked in companionable silence for a while. Then Rodriguez asked the question that had been bothering him for weeks. The 14 seconds between shots. Why that specific timing? Mary's hands paused. "Phoenix, my team leader in Blackbird, had a daughter. She was 14 months old when he died. I never met her, but he talked about her constantly. Said she was going to change the world someday." She resumed working. 14 seconds is my way of remembering. Each shot is a prayer that she gets the chance her father didn't." Rodriguez felt his eyes burn with unshed tears. Every revelation about Mary added another layer to the mystery, another depth to the tragedy and triumph of her story. The weeks turned into months. The Taliban attacks on Fob Echo ceased entirely. Whether from fear of the ghost of Tangi Valley or the disruption of their intelligence network, nobody was certain. Mary returned to her routine, but now she was part of the base's fabric in a way she'd never been before. She trained snipers without officially training them, teaching breathing techniques while supposedly explaining generator maintenance. She shared intelligence gathering methods while discussing supply orders. She was everywhere and nowhere, visible and invisible, Mary Collins and Raven 9 simultaneously. One morning, 6 months after Tangi Valley, Mary didn't show up to make coffee. Frank Williams found her collapsed in her quarters, unconscious and burning with fever. The base medical team discovered what she'd been hiding. A piece of shrapnel from Operation Blackbird, lodged near her spine, had shifted. It had been slowly working its way toward her spinal cord for 3 years, and she'd known it. Rodriguez stood by her bed in the medical bay, furious and heartbroken in equal measure. You knew you were dying, and you didn't say anything? Mary, pale and weak but conscious after emergency surgery, managed a slight smile. We're all dying, Rodriguez. I just had a timeline. This isn't a joke. No, she agreed. It's not. But I got 3 more years than my team. 3 years to find peace, to save 8 more lives, to train dozens more. That's not a tragedy, that's a gift. The surgery had been successful, but the damage was extensive. Mary would walk again, but her days of climbing mountains and making impossible shots were over. The tremor in her hands, once manageable, was now permanent and pronounced. Colonel Harrison arranged for a medical discharge and transport back to the States, but Mary refused. This is my home now, she said simply. These are my people. I'm not leaving. So she stayed, transitioning from maintenance to teaching, though her classroom was still the motor pool and her students didn't always know they were learning. The tremor in her hands became a teaching tool, showing young snipers how to compensate for physical limitations, how to adapt rather than quit. The base adapted around her. They built a ramp to her workshop when the stairs became too difficult. They installed better lighting when her eyes began to struggle. They protected her as she had protected them, a circle of loyalty forged in fire and tested in blood. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains painting them crimson and gold, Mary sat with Rodriguez on the roof of the command center. It had become their tradition, watching the sunset, discussing the day's events, sharing the silence that said more than words. I've been thinking about Blackbird, Rodriguez said carefully. About your team. Mary nodded, waiting. They would be proud of what you've become. Not Raven 9, but Mary Collins, the woman who found a way to serve without killing, to protect without destroying. Mary was quiet for a long moment. I hope so. I hope they understand why I lived when they didn't. Why I hid instead of dying gloriously. Because you had more work to do, Rodriguez said simply. Because 8 SEALs needed saving. Because hundreds of troops needed training. Because sometimes the hardest thing isn't dying for your country, but living for it. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell over Fob Echo. Below them, the base went about its evening routine. Guards changing shifts, mechanics finishing repairs, cooks preparing the next day's meals. All of them part of a machine that Mary had helped repair not with tools, but with wisdom, courage, and the kind of strength that didn't announce itself. Later that night, Mary was in her workshop organizing tools when her phone buzzed. Not her regular phone, but the encrypted device she'd kept hidden for 3 years. The one that connected her to a world she'd tried to leave behind. The message was simple. Phoenix's daughter is 18 now. She's been accepted to West Point. Thought you should know. Guardian. Mary stared at the message, tears flowing freely down her weathered cheeks. Phoenix's daughter had gotten her chance at changing the world. The 14-second prayer had been answered. She typed back a single word. Acknowledged. Then she added, tell her about her father. Tell her he was a hero. Tell her heroes don't always come home, but their legacy lives forever. The response came quickly. Already did. She says she wants to be like the sniper who saved 8 SEALs, the ghost of Tangi Valley. She says that's the kind of hero the world needs. Mary smiled through her tears and typed, tell her the ghost was just someone who learned that strength comes in many forms, that true courage is being ordinary in extraordinary circumstances, that the best warriors are the ones who find ways not to fight. She deleted the message thread, habit and security protocol still strong after all these years. But as she did, another message appeared, this one from a different source. Kashmir situation critical. Phoenix protocol activated. Raven needed. 72 hours. Mary stared at the screen. She couldn't shoot anymore, couldn't climb mountains or survive behind enemy lines. But she could think, plan, analyze. She could be the mind if not the body. She looked at her trembling hands, at the workshop full of half-repaired vehicles, at the coffee maker ready for tomorrow's 0400 shift. Then she looked at the message again. Rodriguez found her there an hour later, still staring at the phone. "Everything all right?" he asked. Mary looked up at him, this warrior she'd saved, trained, transformed from arrogant to humble. "If you had a chance to save lives but it meant leaving everything behind, would you take it?" Rodriguez didn't hesitate. "Every time. It's what we do." Mary nodded slowly, decision made. She stood, her movements careful but determined, and walked to the tool cabinet. From the hidden compartment she pulled out one last item, a small journal filled with codes, contacts, and contingency plans. "I need you to do something for me," she said, handing him the journal. "If I don't come back, everything the base needs to know is in here. Communication protocols, threat assessments, early warning signs. 20 years of knowledge distilled into one book." Rodriguez took it reverently, understanding the trust being placed in him. "You're leaving. For a while, maybe forever, I don't know." She looked around the workshop one last time. "Take care of them, Rodriguez. Remember what you've learned. Strength isn't about muscle or weapons. It's about seeing what others miss, valuing what others dismiss, protecting what others ignore." She pulled on her faded jacket, the Raven emblem barely visible in the fluorescent light. As she reached the door, Rodriguez called out, "Mary, Raven 9, whoever you are, thank you for everything." She turned back, and for a moment he saw it all. The warrior, the ghost, the coffee lady, the hero, all wrapped in one small, trembling frame. "Heroes save heroes," she said simply. "Pass it on." Then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness beyond the doorway. Rodriguez stood there for a long moment, holding the journal, feeling the weight of legacy in his hands. The next morning, the coffee was already made when the base woke up. A note sat beside the pot in Mary's careful handwriting. "Coffee's ready for the next 3 days. After that, you're on your own. Remember, 2 scoops per pot. Never more, never less. Take care of each other. M." The base searched, of course. Harrison sent patrols, checked transportation logs, reviewed security footage, but Mary Collins had vanished as completely as Raven 9 had 3 years earlier. The only trace was a single brass casing left on Harrison's desk, .308 caliber, match grade, with 19 scratched into the base. The 19th shot. The one she hadn't taken yet. The one still waiting to be fired. Rodriguez took over the morning coffee duty. It was terrible at first. Too weak, too strong, somehow both burned and undercooked. But he kept at it, remembering Mary's patience, her persistence, her quiet determination. Eventually, he got it right. The workshop became a shrine of sorts. Nobody said it out loud, but tools were replaced exactly where Mary had left them. Her welding mask hung on its hook, waiting. The hidden compartment stayed hidden, though everyone now knew it was there. And somewhere in Kashmir, in a situation nobody would ever hear about, plans were being made, intelligence gathered, lives saved. Not by the ghost of Tangi Valley, but by someone even more dangerous. A mind that could see patterns in chaos, find weakness in strength, turn coffee makers into warriors and warriors into protectors. The legend of Mary Collins grew with each retelling. The maintenance woman who was really a Delta Force sniper, the coffee lady who saved 8 SEALs, the ghost who chose to live instead of die, to build instead of destroy, to disappear instead of being celebrated. But Rodriguez, standing in the workshop one evening months later, teaching a young private how to properly maintain a rifle, knew the real truth. Mary Collins wasn't a legend or a ghost or even a hero in the traditional sense. She was proof that everyone has value, that strength comes in unexpected forms, that the most powerful warriors are the ones who know when not to fight. As he worked, he found himself counting, 14 seconds between each instruction, a rhythm he'd inherited without realizing it. A prayer for the fallen, a promise to the living, a legacy written not in medals or commendations, but in the quiet acts of service that kept the world turning. Outside, the sun set behind the mountains, painting them the color of old blood and new hope. And somewhere, Mary Collins continued her work, invisible and invaluable, a shadow that protected from the darkness. The war would continue. Soldiers would deploy and return, some whole, some broken, some not at all. But at FOB Echo, something had fundamentally changed. They looked at each other differently now, understanding that the person serving coffee might be the one who saved your life. That true strength was sometimes disguised as weakness, that heroes didn't always wear uniforms or carry weapons. Rodriguez closed the workshop for the night, but before he did, he performed what had become a ritual. He placed a single brass casing on the workbench. Not from any significant shot, just a training round from the range. It was his promise to remember, to carry forward what he'd learned, to see the Mary Collins in everyone he met. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the base, a phone buzzed with a new message. Phoenix Protocol complete, 23 lives saved, Raven returning to nest. But Mary Collins never returned to FOB Echo. She became the wind that whispered through the mountains, the shadow that fell across the valley at sunset, the ghost story that reminded soldiers to respect everyone, value everyone, protect everyone, because heroes save heroes. This truth echoes through the mountains surrounding FOB Echo, carried on winds that have witnessed centuries of warriors passing through these ancient valleys. It whispers in the mess hall, where soldiers share meals and stories, never knowing if the person serving their food once held a rifle steady enough to split a playing card at 1,000 meters. It resonates in the motor pool, where mechanics work with oil-stained hands that might have once squeezed triggers in battles that will never be declassified. The concept redefines everything we think we know about courage and strength. Heroes aren't just the ones charging into gunfire or fast roping from helicopters in hostile territory. They're the ones who wake at 0400 to ensure hot coffee greets exhausted soldiers. They're the ones who tighten bolts on vehicles, knowing that a single loose screw could mean the difference between a successful mission and a memorial service. They're the invisible foundation upon which all visible heroism stands. And sometimes, the greatest hero is the one nobody sees coming. The one whose weathered hands shake not from fear, but from old wounds earned in places whose names are still classified. The one who chose to trade a sniper's scope for a wrench. Not because they couldn't fight anymore, but because they understood that building is harder than destroying. The one who sits quietly in the corner, observing, analyzing, protecting from the shadows, while others stand in the spotlight. They walk among us disguised as ordinary people, their extraordinary nature hidden beneath worn clothing and tired eyes. They have learned that true power isn't in being recognized, but in recognizing others. They understand that the highest form of warfare is preventing the fight altogether. The one who makes the coffee.
The stories end here, but the journey continues. Many new episodes are waiting for you. And if you enjoy, please take a moment to like, subscribe to our EV Story channel, and turn on the bell. See you in the next story.